Welcome back to Wake of America Early. I'm Alex Kramer. We're taking another look at President Trump's much anticipated meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin happening later today in Alaska. So joining us now for more is the National Security Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Steve Yates, as well as the Russia Program Deputy Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, John Hardie. Good morning, gentlemen. Steve, I'm going to start with you. Today is the day we've been talking about it, leading up to it all week. Just very simply, what are you expecting to happen here? Will we finally see the beginnings of a ceasefire deal?
Well, I think President Trump has been the most transparent of presidents perhaps ever. And I agree with him basically saying this is somewhat of a temperature take. It's strategically significant. This is the first in-person meeting that these two leaders have had. We have interest beyond Ukraine, but Ukraine is by far the dominant discussion for today. But really, this is going to be the beginning of a process. I don't expect a major agreement or terms. I expect this to basically be a gut check of, is Vladimir Putin at all committed to any real peace? And even if he says something, President Trump is going to have to see measurable results, having kind of played Lucy in the football with him on the phone for several times. We're going to have real measured progress.
And John, I guess just to follow up on that, what would measurable progress look like to the Trump administration from Putin?
Well, thanks for having me. I think my colleague is right that we can't expect a ceasefire immediately to come out of this meeting. What, to me, would be a good outcome is if we can start to work on Putin's overconfidence in the fact that in his mind, he's winning in Ukraine and therefore unwilling to make major compromises. So long as he remains wedded to maximalist hardline demands that are just non-starters for Ukraine, like conditioning a ceasefire on a Ukrainian withdrawal from large swaths of territory, well, peace just isn't going to happen. So I think President Trump has to use a combination of carrots and sticks, economic pressure, support for Ukraine, to show Putin that now's the time to stop shooting.
Yeah, and Zelensky has made it very clear he is not going to cede any land to Russia. That's kind of been a hard stop, a hard line on his end. But let's move on to this. So Putin wants to try to get back into the Western financial system. But President Trump has not lifted the harsh economic sanctions imposed on Russia. So here's what Newsmax's White House correspondent Mike Carter asking about what would happen if Putin does not agree to stop the war. Take a listen.
Will Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
There will be
consequences. Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences.
Okay, so, Steve, we know Putin values the dollar. He knows it's a lot of it is about money, and that's why I think these sanctions are so important. Trump all week has said over and over again, he's used the word economic incentives, economic disincentives. We've got the economic sanctions. We saw what he did with India because they're buying so much oil from Russia, those 50% sanctions on them. How important is this economic leverage when it comes to making a deal, Steve?
Well, the economic leverage is very important. I mean, President Trump follows a pretty clear playbook on these kinds of negotiations. He's holding out a vision for a potential future that would be an alternative path to peace and prosperity. It's a theme replicated in multiple regions around the world, most famously in the Abraham Accords, but it's really throughout his kind of thinking about how to hold out that positive vision. But if you prove to be standing in the way of that positive vision, he's willing and able to bring power and force into the equation. And so I think the financial measures that have been threatened, the secondary sanctions that were talked about, did have a role in bringing Putin to the talks. I think it's a challenge to try to sustain those over time. And that's why I think the president's been correct to be strategically clear but tactically ambiguous about what exactly he would do.
Yeah, when it comes to being ambiguous, he came out and said, I'm not going to show my hand when it comes to what I can do. John, your thoughts on all of this and just the financial side of making this deal?
Well, I think economic pressure on Russia is very important. It's not going to be a knockout blow, and we know Putin feels overconfident that his economy can withstand whatever we throw at him. But I think if properly applied and applied to our maximal potential, we can really exacerbate the already significant woes the Russian economy is experiencing. And my hope is that over time, if you combine that economic pressure with strong support for Ukrainian forces, showing Putin he's not going to be able to gain significant territory or leverage through military force, and then you have the economic pressure coming on top of that, over time, perhaps he might be more willing to compromise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So moving on to this is kind of another interesting side to this conflict. So Putin praising Trump's, quote, energetic and sincere peace efforts, while also suggesting that a deal on, get this, nuclear arms control could be part of the talks. Steve, what would that look like? And what exactly is that referring to? How optimistic do you think that would be involved?
Now, I see that as part of them dusting off an old playbook to a certain degree. I mean, the most rapidly expanding nuclear program on the planet right now is in the People's Republic of China. And so if we're going to really have some kind of strategic arms control, there's no way to really consider it to be serious if it doesn't really focus on that most rapidly expanding program. So I think this is kind of the Russian side going back to past administrations of figuring out what worked to get engaged in dialogue. A lot of presidents, once they're engaged in dialogue, lessen pressure in other areas. I just don't think they've fully calculated that Donald Trump is from a different kind of cloth. And I think he's going to be laser focused on the results he expects and needs in the short term. I still think this is a hard grind, but I really applaud the president for putting short deadlines, because in government, if you don't put a short deadline it just goes on forever. And so I think they're headed in the right way. The Russians are going to try to put a lot of delay and process into the mix.
Yeah, and I like that you said that he's cut from a different cloth. Trump is not a lifelong politician. He's a businessman, and he does know how deals work. Really quickly, John, I do want to get just your final thoughts on today's meeting.
I think my colleague is exactly right. President Trump needs to remind Putin that he's on the clock to make measurable steps toward peace in the very short term. And I would hope that, as the president said, if we come out of this meeting without getting a commitment from Putin and any movement toward peace, we will see significant consequences, including the economic pressure we discussed, including stepping up support for Ukrainian forces, maybe providing Ukraine with longer-range missiles that can hit military-industrial plants deeper inside Russia.
Yeah, well, we will find out in just a few short hours. Again, President Trump meeting with President Vladimir Putin today in Alaska. Today is the big day. So Steve Yates, John Hardie, thank you so much for joining us this morning, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.